In this tutorial, I'd like to show you how to apply the profile scheme for historical narrative. This presupposes the information on how to first of all do the Hebrew verb layout, and then you can apply the information you're going to learn in this tutorial. First thing you'd want to do is have your discourse profile historical narrative document open, because you need to be familiar with the information on this page, as well as using it as a means to cut and paste the different numbers for the individual clauses. So be familiar as much as you can with this document. Now here is a Hebrew verb layout that does not yet have the numbers to identify each of the clauses. So here's Ruth chapter 1, and notice of course we've already applied the Hebrew verb layout scheme, where we have the Hebrew text as well as the New American Standard text underneath. But we want to put numbers at the beginning of the clauses to identify what role it plays on a discourse profile. So if we take a look here at the first verse, actually the first two clauses of the first verse both begin with wayahi, or these are wayato verbs. So if you take a look at the discourse profile, you notice that they are 1A's because they are blue verbs, but if you remember very carefully, down here at number 8, transition markers, they're wayatos of haya or wayahi. So since those are the first two clauses begin with the wayahi, we're going to go ahead and copy. So highlight that 8 with the box around it, right click and say copy, or you can use the Control-C button, and then we can begin to place it at the beginning. Now before I go any further, I need to let you know there's a little bit of issues sometimes with Microsoft Word and Hebrew text and English text, Hebrew going right to left and English going left to right. So you have to be familiar with two keys on your keyboard to assist you in placing the numbers at the beginning of a line. And that is the home and sometimes even the end key. If you use the cursor, if I notice that if I try to click over here, it doesn't get me to the beginning of the line. It still has the cursor flashing after the 1. So sometimes you have to tap the home key, and that brings you to the beginning of the line, and then you do Control-V, and that brings in the number. And we're going to do that for the second line. So then home key, space, sometimes I like to put a little space, that way then the number is not right up against the Hebrew word. Control-V, and there we have it. So we've already identified the first two lines of Ruth chapter 1. So notice that the wayato verb 1A is going to be very common in historical narrative. So go ahead and copy that, and what I typically recommend is just go ahead and notice the cursor was placed there, so I go ahead and Control-V. But if the cursor didn't go there like it is here, hit the home key, space bar, home, and then we can do that. And just do like that all the way through. Home, space, home, and that brings all that. So it's easier to do all the wayatos all in a row because you don't have to do a bunch of cutting and pastings. Alright, let's identify what's going on here in the second verse. Notice the name of the man was Elimelech. Notice the was is supplied. There is no colored verb form in Ruth chapter 1-2. So we look on our profile and notice verbose clauses are number 9. They typically set the scene for narratives, and that's what we have going on here. So we'll go ahead and place a 9 at the beginning. So home, space, home. Gives a little bit of problems there, but that's again some of the issues we face. Home, space. In this case, I don't think I need to do another home, and same with this one. So home, space bar, home. And notice then we have the clauses numbered for that. Let me show you a couple of the other forms that you will encounter in the text. Again, there right here in the second clause of verse 4 is another verbose clause. But let's go down till we see something a little different. Okay, notice in verse 6, the last two clauses have perfect verbs. So if we look at the profile, you'll see red or perfect verbs occur at 4 different places on the profile. If it has a vav, it can be a weak-ital, or for 1b, or it can be a series of weak-itals, and it would be procedural discourse. But since our perfect verb there did not have a vav, it cannot be a 1b. It would have to either be a number 2 or a number 4. So the difference between number 2 and 4, they're both with perfect verbs, is that here we have any element, typically a nominal element, before a perfect verb or katal, and that is called fronting. In number 4, we have something where we have one of these relative pronouns, ke'ashir, ashir, or ki, or even im, with the perfect verb, and those are relative clauses. Now, if we take a look back at our text, notice we have clauses here that begin with the relative pronoun ki, and same with this clause here, ashir. So if we go back to the document, notice ashir and ki, the words we just saw, identify with the perfect verb that it is a number 4, and that is a relative clause containing past background. So go ahead and copy that, Control C, come back over, and you can go ahead, home, space, home, paste, home, space, home, paste, home, space, home, and again, remember you may have to do end, if that will help sometimes to identify that. Alright, let's see if we can see other types of clauses. Here we see in verse 8 a clause with embedded speech. So let's take a look at that. Number 3 is embedded speech, direct speech, typically introduced by one of the verbs that introduce speech acts, deber, lemer, or wayomer. But it also has a wayikto verb, wayomer, that begins it. So what I normally do, if I keep the speech acts together, is I bring over the wayikto first, come to the beginning, home, space, but notice that it's also a number 3 clause. So only in these cases where there's wayomer verbs and wadeber verbs with speech acts, I do 1a, comma, 3. That way then it lets me know that not only is there a baseline verb, it introduces a speech act coming, there is also the speech act itself, and that is identified by number 3. But notice now in verse 9, there is no verb that introduces it, so we're just going to go ahead and cut and paste number 3 before that line. So home, space, home, and there we have the 3 identifying it. Alright, let's go down one more section, and I'll show you an example of fronting. Here, the last clause in verse 14 is something before the perfect or katal verb, the red verb. So if we take a look at it again, notice we have here a element, an X element, that could be typically a noun, that comes before a perfect verb. In this case, it's the conjunction vav with the pronoun or the proper noun Ruth before the perfect verb here. So this is a perfect example of fronting. So home, space, home, Control V, and there we have the example of fronting in here. We don't have a clear example in this passage of a participle, which would typically be background activities. We do have a participle here in verse 1, the first clause, but this is actually a nominal participle for the word judges, those who judge, and so it is something that you do have to be aware of when you look at the number 6 background activities. They're typically shown by the verb participles, but some participles are really not true participles in the sense of verbal ideas. They're really more occupations or nominal participles, such as in this case the word for judges. I hope this gives you enough brief introduction to how to apply the Hebrew verb layout for historical narrative numbering scheme on your Hebrew verb layout.